The title of my talk this evening is Jews at the Crossroads in Europe. I actually want to start with a letter I received 2 days ago from Rabbi Bush, the head of the Halachic Committee of the Rabbinical Council of America. He wrote me a letter asking us in Europe to give some advice to American Jewish congregations how to deal with security issues regarding Shabbat and the Jewish holidays. You know, when I entered tonight your beautiful synagogue here, I thought to myself, nowhere in Europe would you be able to enter in such a way into a synagogue in Europe. You would have to go through security, through double door system. And I'm asking myself to what extent the world, there's a saying in the Talmud, Sadna da'ara chadahu. The world is all part of the same world. To what extent here in the United States, unfortunately, after the 3 attacks you had over here in San Diego, in Pittsburgh, and also the latest in New Jersey, do you have to change your modus operandi and the security of Jewish institutions, schools, and shuls? Before I dwell into the general situation of Jews in Europe, I have to say a few words about Europe, because the situation of Jews in Europe depends on the general political situation in Europe. After 1945, after the Shoah and World War II, the Europeans came to a realization that they cannot continue to live the same way they have lived for the last 500 years. And they decided to start a European Union. This is a very slow process of uniting economically. And they created the European Union. Originally, it was only an economic union. And later, they understood that they have to unite in different ways as well. So actually, when we talk about Europe, we can talk about three circles in Europe. There's the outer circle, which is the Council of Europe. These are the 48 countries, of which the former Soviet Union Turkey is part of it. And then you have the European Union, which is the 27 countries after Brexit, or 28 countries before Brexit. And then you have the 11 countries which are united in the inner circle through the Eurozone. They have the same currency, and also the Schengen Pact, meaning that you need only a visa to all the 11 countries together. Actually, Switzerland, which is not part of the Union, is part of this Schengen Pact. And basically, there are no passport controls, no borders between those countries. So for all due purposes, those 11 countries are like one super country. It's like the United States. When you go from New Jersey to New York, you don't have to go through passport control. You don't have to go through customs. So actually, what has happened is that this super country, those 11 countries which are united by the currency and by common borders, when they united, they only thought about the economic benefits of this unity. They never thought about the security aspect of having the borders together. So actually, what has happened is that if ISIS, walking time bomb, and terrorists wanted to travel from Brussels to Paris to carry out a terrorist attack, he just had to go into a train. These are the TGV, the Train à Grande Vitesse. These are the very fast trains. You don't have them in the United States yet. They go 300, 400 kilometers an hour, 200-300 miles an hour. So within 1 hour, this terrorist would have been in Paris, would be able to carry out a terrorist attack without going through any type of border or passport control. However, if the police in Paris wanted to interrogate the suspect and wanted to extradite this suspect to go from Brussels to Paris, they had the French police had to request the Belgian police. It had to go through court. It was a 1-year process to get the suspect from Belgium to France. So you can understand what has happened, that in terms of providing security for its citizens, the European Union was totally incapable of doing so, because when they united, they only thought about economics. They never thought about the security issue. And actually, Europe was challenged by two security challenges. One was the outer challenge, was the refugee crisis. All those refugees coming from the Middle East, especially from Syria, but not only refugees from countries where you had the civil war, but also a lot of economic refugees who just moved from Somalia, from Africa, because over there they made $2 a month. And when they came to Europe, they were guaranteed an income of €2,000 a month, which is about $2,400 a month. So a lot of those economic refugees. And secondly, you had the problem of internal security of terrorism. The first victims, as always, were the Jews. There were terrorist attacks against the Jewish school in Toulouse about 7 years ago. 4 people were killed: children, parents, teachers. And then in Paris, Jews were killed as well. And then came the moment which we know, the Charlie Hebdo attack in 2015, when Arab ISIS terrorists attacked the main office of one of the great satire newspapers of France. It's called Charlie Hebdo, because they made a caricature of the Prophet. And when those terrorists attacked a newspaper office, that's when the French woke up. It was not a Jewish problem anymore. It became a European problem. And then when the terrorists attacked in Nice on the day of Independence Day of the French, on the Bastille Day of the day, they killed 80 people on the Promenade des Anglais in Nice. And when they attacked also the Christmas market in Berlin and a church in Reims, it is at that moment that the Europeans understood that Arab terrorism is not a Jewish problem. It is a European problem. And they understood that if they're not going to attack this problem and find a solution to this problem, Europe is going to destroy itself. And actually, what you have seen with Brexit is part of this. Brexit is a result of the English people saying that we don't want to be part of Europe where Europeans are being attacked by terrorists, by Arab terrorists. So, but as you know, they say the difference between Jews and Brits, they leave a party without saying goodbye. And Jews, they say goodbye, but they don't leave. And the Brits have been behaving more like Jews than like Brits. They've been saying they're leaving, they're not leaving, they're still there. So, and the result of the turbulence of politics in Great Britain, with Corbyn and with Boris Johnson, has been also a reaction to the political problems in Europe. Now I want to go a step back and say, in Europe today, you know how many immigrants you have who are Muslims? How many do you think? 2 million, like in the United States. Somebody has a different number? How much? 5 million. Okay, anybody has a different suggestion? What? 20. What if I tell you that the real number is between 40 and 50 million? You have between 40 and 50 million Muslims living in Europe today. And I'm including here the old Europeans like the Bosnian Muslims, the Muslims from ex-Yugoslavia, and you have more people going to mosques on Fridays in France and England than people going to churches on Sunday. So you have this challenge. That's one of the big challenges to European Jewry. How many Jews do you have left in Europe today? 1.6 million. Mostly in France, England, Russia, Ukraine, Germany, the two countries in Europe where the Jewish community is growing, Germany and Monaco. In all the other countries, the number of Jews is diminishing. For a long time, as long as the authorities were not able to give an answer and to protect the Jewish community from terrorism, this created a mass emigration. The biggest mass emigration was from Jews from France and from Belgium leaving to Israel. About 150,000 Jews left France to Israel, and when we're talking to Jews, there were about 700,000 Jews in France. Those who left were the core of the community. They were not just Jews. The presidents of communities, the rabbis, the teachers, the principals of schools, the core of the community left to Israel, and it weakened the community very much. Now, the good news is that after the Islamic terrorists decided to attack non-Jews as well, big mistake, Europe started to deal with this problem internally. Today, to extradite a terrorist suspect from Brussels to Paris, from Belgium to France, takes 10 days. All the security agencies of all those countries started to cooperate. They're cooperating very much. And there is today the technology and also the political will to go after these people, even before they have committed a terrorist act. Today, it is possible to monitor anyone who was in Syria, anyone who was in Iraq, all the people who worked for ISIS, they're all being monitored. And after Charlie Hebdo, the French government put soldiers with machine guns in front of every synagogue, every school, and every community center. They spent €1 million per day to protect Jewish communities. And that's the good news also that in other countries, in Germany, in England, and this was the big issue in England, if the British government is giving £20 million a year to the Community Security Trust to protect schools and synagogues in Great Britain. If Jeremy Corbyn would have been elected, most probably he would have discontinued this practice. But this has been only one of the challenges, challenging European Jewry. The other challenge was or is the counter-reaction of old Europe to the Muslim immigration. Europeans they hated the Jews always. With the Muslims, they don't only hate them, they are afraid of them. So they decided to go and the old Europeans, I call the old Europeans, and make their life miserable. How do you make their life miserable? By introducing legislation which makes the life difficult. For example, Switzerland introduced legislation and passed a law which outlawed the building of minarets of mosques. Very nice law. France passed a law to forbid women to cover their hair. Muslim girls, as well as Jewish boys today, cannot wear kippah or head covering in a school in France. And I, at that time, knew already that this is a very bad and dangerous precedent. The next day, they're going to tell us what to eat and how to educate our children. Legislation against shchita and against brit milah, against ritual slaughtering and against circumcision. they started passing these laws. There are countries in Europe which have laws against Shechita since time immemorial. I was born in Switzerland, in Zurich. Switzerland has passed in 1895, has passed a law forbidding Shechita. Why? Because Russian Jews, who at that time, before communism, were religious, wanted to come live in Switzerland, and they wanted to stop them to come. So say, okay, if you want to come, you have to become vegetarian. There is no shechita in Switzerland since 1895. But in 1933, one of the first anti-Semitic acts passed by the Hitler government in Germany was also an anti-shechita law. The idea was not to stop immigration, but to encourage emigration. They wanted all the Jews in Germany who were traditional Orthodox to leave. There were, at that time, 500,000 Jews in Germany, and I think it really helped. Over 200,000 Jews left Germany to Palestine, to Eretz Israel, and to other countries. The laws today against Shechita and against Brit Milah proposed in Germany, in Belgium, in Iceland, are really directed at the Muslim immigrants. We, the Jews, are the collateral damage. Now, it is one thing to live in a country where you have no shechita. So you cannot, if you live in Belgium, for example, they just passed a law against shechita. So you can import your meat from France, you can import your meat from other places. It's just more expensive. I remember in Switzerland, you go into a butcher shop, how much you pay here for a pound of steak here in Stamford? How much? $15, 1 pound. So a kilo is like 2 pounds, right? So it's $30, it's $100 per kilo, $50 in Switzerland. So it's costly, it costs more, but you can live with it. But if you outlaw Brit Milah, what are the consequences? The consequences are very simple. Young Jewish families are not going to be able to live in this country. Because even if they take, let's say, they live in Germany and they had a child, a boy, and they want to make a Brit Milah, they take the child to, let's say, to Antwerp, over the border, but they are doing something against the law. They are circumcising their child who is a German citizen, and they themselves are a German citizen. It is a problem. I'm, as you know, as your rabbi has told you, I'm the president of the Conference of European Rabbis. Since 2011, we unite the communal rabbis in Europe. They're like the chief rabbis of England, of France. And one of our major tasks is to fight for religious freedom today in Europe. We're fighting for religious freedom and against the infringement of religious freedom. And we have a big problem because actually the attack is not against us. We are the collateral damage. And we have to explain, that, for example, and what is very interesting, that those parties, those political parties which are introducing these legislations are usually part of the far right. The part of the far right, the very anti-Muslim. And when you tell them, listen, this does not only affect the Muslims, it affects us Jews as well, they say, okay, oy l'rasha, oy l'shcheno. Okay, very good. We're not only punishing the Muslims, we're punishing the Jews as well. And at one point I said that the Jews today in Europe are like people who are standing on the train tracks, and you look to the right and you look to the left where the train is going to come from. You don't know where the train is going to come from, but you're being attacked both from the far left and from the Islamic radicals, and you're being attacked from the far right. As you've seen here in the United States, the 2 attacks against synagogues in Pittsburgh and San Diego were from the far right. The attack on Yom Kippur in the city of Halle was also from the far right. The far right has become much more powerful and influential in European politics. They've been joining the coalition in Austria. The head of the far right in France, Marine Le Pen, almost became the president of France. She lost against Macron. And in Germany, in Eastern Germany, in some of the Länder, the far right has reached more than 22% of the electorate. They never had even one representative in the local parliaments. And now they have 22%. And what is happening is something very interesting. Many of the far-right parties say, we are the friends of the Jews. We love Israel. Actually, I was in Israel. I was in Israel a few months ago. I was at a conference on the unity of the Jewish people. We had everybody there from all the denominations, from all the countries. And I was sitting there with the representatives of really the rainbow of the Jewish people as it is representative today. And one German Jew, secular part of the political body, told the people around the table, let's come to a conclusion that we will not support the far right. So there was a rabbi there from the Mitnachalim, the settler movement. One of the most prominent rabbis says, why shouldn't we support them? They support us. So I told him, maybe they support you, but you should know that legislation against Brit Milah and against Shchita is starting from them in Europe. And you should know that some of those parties have been founded by real anti-Semites, SS officers. So he thought about this for a moment and said, you know, but where is the center of the Jewish people today? It's Europe or Israel? So it is Israel. So the interest of Israel should come on the first place. The interest of European Jewry should come in the second place. This was the end of our discussion. I think once he said this, there was nothing else to discuss. Coming back to the issues we have in Europe with the far right and with the far left, these are the challenges today challenging European Jews. And this is the reason why many European Jews are thinking, really, if there is a future for Jews in Europe, or maybe it is worthwhile to go to Israel or to emigrate to the United States. I remember when there was the attack in Pittsburgh. The attack was against a conservative synagogue in Pittsburgh. My wife's cousin is the rabbi of the Orthodox, Rabbi Wasserman, of the rabbi of the Orthodox synagogue in Pittsburgh, right next to the conservative synagogue. And I called him the same evening. He's the one who also the head of the Chevra Kadisha there, who gathered all the remains of the victims. I called him up the next evening to find out if he's okay, and he told me something very interesting but remarkable, that they were locked in their shul for a few hours during that Shabbat. And one of the congregants came over to him and said, Rabbi, I just moved from Paris to Pittsburgh a year ago because we wanted to run away from terrorism. Here I am locked in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. So in the Conference of European Rabbis, how are we dealing with, we're dealing with Shchita, with Milah. We have been able to avert the legislation in Germany, in Poland, in Iceland. In Belgium we had problems. But we were fighting for religious freedom. And here is something very interesting, that we are finding partners in other faiths as well. We're working with other faith leaders. And unsurprisingly, we also found partners, moderate Muslim leaders in Europe. And it's something very interesting that many Muslim moderate leaders, they are also victims of Muslim Islamic fundamentalism and Islamic radicalism. And they are ready to work with us together. We founded with them together the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council under the roof of a Saudi Interreligious Council in Vienna, where we're working together on religious freedom issues, also against anti-Semitism and against Islamophobia. At the same time, after the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, we published a manifesto how to fight religious radicalism. We didn't write only religious radicalism among the Muslims, religious radicalism in general. And we came up with 3 proposals. Proposal number 1, that religious leaders have to be educated in institutions which do not teach radicalism. And those institutions, if they are outside of Europe, have to be certified by European institutions that they don't teach radical religion. Number 2, that inside each religious congregation, there should be one person from within the faith who will make sure that religious texts are not being manipulated to teach jihad or any types of terrorism. Sometimes it takes somebody only from the inside who can do it. And 3, which is most important, that the donation dollar or the donation euro should come from sources, should be transparent and come from sources which do not sponsor or are interested to promote radicalism or terrorism. We wrote letters to 27 ministers of the interior in Europe. We received about 7-8 answers. 2 countries implemented our suggestions, Austria and France. Now, the question people are asking, how can we fight far-right radicalism? How can we fight that? Unfortunately, this is also not any less a threat than Muslim radicalism. Most attacks against the Jewish community in Germany were from the far right. They were not from the Muslims. So I think the answer is fairly simple and straightforward. I don't know how many of you have followed the speech of the Jewish actor, Sacha Baron Cohen, in front of the ADL, where he has come forward and said that the big culprit, the platform today for hate, for racism, and anti-Semitism are the big 4, the social medias. The social medias have no controls. They allow everything. And the murders and the terrorist attacks against the mosque in New Zealand, against the shul in Pittsburgh, they were all carried out live on Facebook. And the leaders of the social media have a responsibility. It has nothing to do with free speech. You can have free speech, but the difference between free speech and having a platform on the social media, it's like the difference of having a pistol or flying an F-16. So we think that this is the way to fight far-right radicalism, is by making the social medias responsible for it. Based on the fact that European Jews each one is thinking, maybe I have to leave Europe. Maybe we have to leave. If Jeremy Corbyn would have won in England, if Marine Le Pen would have become the president of France, it would have meant that thousands and tens of thousands of Jews would have left those countries. So because Jews are thinking of, maybe I have to leave, maybe now is the time to leave, on this basis, it's not only a problem, but every problem also brings with it some opportunities. People who are in business know that. You know that one of the big problems we have today in the Orthodox world is the Aguna problem. What is the Aguna problem? We're talking about women who got married according to halakha, in a chuppah, in a marriage, and then they separated, and the husbands have no way, have no interest, they want to punish them, to give them a kosher get, and the women, therefore, are tied to their husbands, cannot remarry, and in case they have a child without receiving a get, the child is considered illegitimate. It basically destroys the life of these women. This has been one of the big problems of the Orthodox world since emancipation, since the rabbinical courts or the communities did not have the power to enforce a reluctant husband to give a bill of divorce to their wives. So here in America, you have they found a way to deal with it through a prenuptial agreement, or there's this organization called ORA. So we felt that in using the mindset of European Jewry today, where everyone is thinking maybe one day I'm going to have to leave to Israel or run away to Israel, we proposed to solve the problem in a very specific manner. We came to the Knesset. We asked the Knesset to legislate a law which would enlarge the power of jurisdiction of the Israeli rabbinate to deal with Aguna cases, even for cases when both sides are not Israeli citizens and are not residents of Israel. So we passed this law. It was supported by the women's lobby in the Knesset, by non-religious parties, even by anti-clerical parties, by Yair Lapid's party, by Mrs. Aliza Levy. Since this law was passed, over 30 cases of agunot were solved because any husband who wanted to make promise for his wife knew that at the end of the day, he is going to have more problems because basically it means that Israel is going to be close to him. And for a European Jew not to be able to go to Israel to visit a parent, to visit a child, to visit a brother, or not to go himself, is a problem. One more issue I wanted to talk to you about is the security issue. I started with that. Security costs money. European communities spend between 25% to 49% of their annual budgets for security. When I'm talking about communities, I'm not talking about shuls, congregations. I'm talking communities, synagogues, which have schools, cemeteries, old age homes. For example, the community of Munich, which has 10,000 members, employs full-time 18 Israeli ex-soldiers in security. The community of Zurich is employing 9 people full-time. Because they're Jewish, there's also many halachic questions arise on Shabbat, etc. So the security issue in Europe is a major issue. There have been attacks against synagogues even before ISIS. Remember in the 1970s, 1980s, Palestinians attacked the synagogue in Vienna, the synagogue in Rome, with unfortunately many victims. So we, in the Conference of European Rabbis, we are going to the governments in Europe and we are telling them to help the Jewish community. They have to help the Jewish community. For example, in Switzerland, they always loved the Jews. They had a great love for Jews. So when the Jewish community in Switzerland came to the government to ask them for help, so the government said, you Jews, you're rich enough. You can take care of your own security. So the Swiss Jewish community called us in and asked us to speak to the government. And I told them openly, the government, the community can defend itself against some thieves, some hooligans, but against terrorism, it is a government which is responsible to protect its citizens against terrorism. So every year at the Munich Security Conference, which is like the Davos which is for the World Economic Forum in Munich, it's the World Security Forum, we're making a presentation to the governments to ask them to help Jewish communities with security. Now, till now, I've only spoken about the problems. I've not spoken about the bright side. With having said that, there is, with 1.5 million Jews in Europe, there is in many places a spiritual renaissance, especially in Eastern Europe. Places which were totally non-existent on the Jewish map, like Russia, Ukraine, Moldavia. Those places today have thriving Jewish communities with schools and with yeshivas and with synagogues. I think that the place where most synagogues were built in the last years in the world, most probably is Russia. It is in the number of synagogues built, numbers of schools built. And having said that, today in Moscow, where we have about 200,000, when I arrived in Moscow 30 years ago, there were about 1 million Jews. Today, there are about less than 200,000 Jews. Of them, 80,000 have an Israeli passport. And also Germany, which was a very small community. Today, you have over 200,000 Jews in Germany. You have many places, you have schools, you have an active Jewish life, not even speaking about France and Paris, where I think Paris has the most kosher restaurants in the world. There are over 200 kosher restaurants in Paris today, and I think they're very good. So with the general situation in Europe of dealing with the security issues and legislation, there is Jewish life is continuing to continue to exist in many places. In many places, you have a very strong Haredi ultra-Orthodox community, like in Antwerp, like in Zurich, like in London, and they're becoming very numerous. So it's, and you have a lot of, it is different in the United States, because in the United States you go from coast to coast, you speak the same language. In Europe you travel 100 miles, you speak a different language. Here you speak French, there you speak Italian. Here you have Ashkenazic Jews, there you have Sephardic Jews. Then you have Italian Jews, then you have the Eastern European Jews, then you have the Western European Jews. Every community is divided by language, by mentality, by tradition, but still we share a common past, a common heritage. And this, by the way, is the great challenge of the European Union, creating a European super mentality, or that people should feel themselves not only as French or Germans or Italians, but should feel themselves as Europeans. Because you cannot create a European army if a French guy is not ready to give up his life for an Italian, and Italian is not ready to give up his life for a Romanian. So this is the big, the creation of a European identity is basically the greatest challenge for the European Union. And I said the European Union is a little bit like the early United States, before it had a common army, before it had a capital, and it can either go forward or it can go backward, but it cannot stay where it is now, because it's like being half pregnant. Or either you go forward, have a child, or you're not pregnant, but it is somewhere in the middle, and it has to go somewhere. And this today, the main topic of discussion among political parties in Europe. So anyway, this is the end of my presentation. I'll be glad to answer a few questions, and thank you very much for listening.
The thing that I don't understand about European Jews is why they continue to live there. The history of the last 1,000 years is incredibly clear. And living there for a Jew is like living in a cemetery. I don't care if they're Islamic, I don't care if they're Gentile. It is something that they imbibe, and instead of just, oh, let's see if we can get by with religious freedom, I don't understand why the leadership doesn't say very clearly and very definitively, get out. There is no hope. It's very clear. That's what our whole history has been in Europe, year after year. If Corbyn had been elected, if Le Pen had been elected, apparently in France, it's legal to kill old Jewish women if you smoke marijuana. The Reichskanzlerin has still not properly responded to Halle. I just don't understand why we stand by and allow this nonsense to go over without giving a very clear and definitive message to our people.
Okay, have you heard his question? Okay. Anyway, I want to give you two answers. First answer, I was asked a few days ago to sit and speak to one of, from my alma mater, a rabbi, an Iranian rabbi, who works with the Iranian Jewish community. And he needed my help. So I asked him, how many Jews are there in Iran? He says, 20,000. So why are they not leaving? Oh, not leaving, each one is real. So listen, Jews are not leaving Iran. Jews are not leaving Europe either. That's number one. Number two, and I hope you're not getting upset at me. According to statistics, it was more dangerous to be a Jew in the United States this last year than in Europe. More Jews were killed in the United States for being Jewish than in Europe. Okay. I know you disagree with me.
No, I don't disagree with you, because I could say the same thing about the United States.
Okay. Are you ready to leave the United States?
Maybe.
I don't think so. I think most of them are not. The rabbi is not ready to leave.
Let's all go.
Okay. Yes.
How many Jews were in Russia? And explain the population change in Moscow.
When the Soviet Union fell apart, there were 3 million Jews in the Soviet Union. Most of them left to Israel, to the United States, to Germany, and to Australia.
Canada.
And Canada, right. Yes.
So, according to your presentation, increased anti-Semitism in Europe is because of increased Muslim population, right?
Not only.
But the government is supposed to be, more friendly to Jews because there is active trade between Israel and the European Union. They sell agriculture, weapons, everything. So, is that the case?
See, I hear from your accent that you're not from Paris. and you're not, okay, you're from Russia or from Ukraine?
I'm from the Soviet Union.
Okay, so let me explain you something. I'm from Russia. One of the only advantages of living in a dictatorship, not living in a democracy, that you only have to convince one person not to be an anti-Semite. In a democracy, you have to convince everybody. So the government can be very friendly to Israel, and still people can attack you in the street. People can attack children with yarmulkes in the streets.
You're talking about Muslims and far right to be the most danger, but lately it seems that the far left is the more danger to Jews. They call for boycott of Israel, of BDS movements. So what do you think? And Corbyn, by the way, is far left.
Right. Okay. With the political turbulence in Europe, the far right is taking over the right. The far left is taking over the left. The far left is very much against Israel. They're not against the local Jewish community. And that's some of the paradoxes we have. Not everyone who is a friend of Israel is a friend of the local Jewish community. And not everyone who is a friend of the local Jewish community is a friend of Israel. And sometimes our allies regarding Israel are not our allies regarding issues of religious freedom.
Albert.
Yeah, I was going to address that. I think one of the issues that I found lacking in your presentation was the outgrowth in secularism that exists in people who are not necessarily affiliated as Jews, but in religious terms, but identify as Jews, are facing increased anti-Semitism just in the daily lives that have nothing necessarily to do with outwardly religious issues. It's become a disease, if you will, of our secular society, regardless of the extreme right or left in the United States, I would argue, but also, I would say, in Europe. You find some middle ground labor individuals, and I happen to know the UK pretty well, who have come out with anti-Semitic remarks, not necessarily directed at religious issues as you framed it, but dealing with Jews as a secular issue. And I think this is pernicious. This is as deadly to the Jewish people as the overt anti-Semitism you get from the far right or the far left.
Okay, I think you're right. I repeat the question. Your name, please, sir?
Albert.
Albert said that the danger from the far left, as England has shown, is not any less than from the far right.
No. Let me rephrase it. I'm talking about the middle ground. I'm talking about the influence that the far right and far left have had in the secular society as a whole, not necessarily limited to the far right and the far left, that is pervasive in the secular society that has been growing in the middle ground that I think your talk is perhaps overlooking.
Okay. First of all, Europe is much more secular than the United States, or was. Number two, the problem in Europe is that the far right has taken over the right in many countries, and the far left, like in England, has taken over the left. This is what has happened in England. And as you know, the world is round, the far left and the far right, they're right next to each other. So I agree with you, but just to tell you that I agree with you that the secular type of anti-Semitism coming from far left is not any less acceptable or any less dangerous, even though real attacks, physical attacks against synagogues or people working with yarmulkes in the street has not happened from the far left. It has, but I've been taking part in a panel in Berlin a week ago in the Berlin Jewish Museum about the visibility of Jews in Germany, meaning as long as the Jews looked like the non-Jews, they were not attacked. Now that the Jews became more religious and you have children working with a yarmulke in the street, you have a problem. Maybe Germany is not tolerant enough for that. So we are having, but for example, when we have a big problem with the far left, with Mélenchon in France, with Corbyn in Great Britain, and I agree with you, it is a problem.
The question is, what countries, if you were going to Europe for the next 6 months, what countries would you stay away from? Go.
The definite suburbs and neighborhoods where I would never walk with a yarmulke or alone, not at night and not during the day, in the suburbs of Paris or in Brussels or in Neukölln in Berlin. But in general, if you with a huge Magen David and a golden chain or whatever, right? So, but if you are walking like a regular citizen, people cannot know that you're Jewish. I think that everywhere within the European Union would be acceptable. Turkey, maybe not. Albania, I wouldn't go there for other reasons.
You living long enough in Russia, you know political situation there very well, I believe. And my question is, we know that Ben Lazar has a very good relationship with Putin. What is your assessment of Mr. Putin?
Why don't you ask him?
What's his assessment of Mr. Putin?
Okay, let me talk about the Jewish community. Since Perestroika and Glasnost, from the early 90s, my wife and I were able to take part in this historical renaissance of the Jewish community. This renaissance really continued also under Putin. Putin is a personal friend of Netanyahu, of Bibi, and even though officially Russian foreign policy is tilted towards Iran and Syria, but the personal relations between the political leaders have also brought benefits to the local Jewish community. And I think that it used to be that the United States was like the guarantor of the Jews in the Soviet Union. They fought, still in the last century, in I think 1903 even, under the Tsar, the Congress passed a resolution about anti-Semitism in Russia. If you ask me today, the situation of Jews in Russia are basically dependent on the relationship between Israel and Russia.
Take 2 more questions. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll just repeat it. Question is, identification of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment. It's certainly a challenging one in America. What is people's approach in Russia to that issue in Europe?
European Jews are very upset if their governments or the European Union is doing something against Israel. And I told this once to a European Union official. I said, listen, I want you to explain me something. Jews left and drove France to Israel while leaving France after the terrorist attacks, while signing contracts to buy apartments in Netanya and Jerusalem, while on Netanya and Jerusalem, rockets fell from Gaza. If you take a look at the statistics, the probability of being killed or attacked by a terrorist in Israel is higher than France. However, why did Jews leave France? Because Jews don't need only security. Jews want respect. And Jews want to be able to fight back.
What countries in Europe today prohibit circumcision?
Iceland tried to pass a law through Parliament. We stopped it with the help of the US Congress here. Germany tried to pass a law, and we stopped it with the help of the Chancellor Angela Merkel. We explained to her that if a law like this is passed, it is the end of an organized Jewish community. And now Belgium is about to start passing such a law. We have been sitting with the Jewish parliamentarian from Belgium, with the Jewish community there, to make sure that this law doesn't stop. Problem is because Europe is so secular. They say, we're not against Jews. All the European politicians say, Europe without Jews is not Europe. France without Jews is not France. Yeah, so why? But by legislating that, that's exactly what you do. No, we're not telling the Jews to leave. We just tell the Jews, don't do Brit Milah. Go explain to them that in 1 week, in a few days, it's Hanukkah, that the revolt against the Greeks on Hanukkah started because we were forbidden to do Brit Milah. Also tell them that the old name of the New Year's Day was the day of the circumcision of the Lord. So, many European politicians, because they're so secular, they say, okay, we're not telling them, we're just telling them to change one of their traditions. We have nothing against the Jews. They don't understand that Jews are ready to leave their country because of such laws. That's our job, to explain to them.
But are there countries that actually have a law in existence?
One country has a law is Slovenia. There's a very little organized Jewish community in Slovenia. The chief mufti of Slovenia asked me to come to Slovenia and help him to repeal this law.
I want to thank I'm sure if anyone wants to visit Moscow, we'll make sure that the Goldschmidts, I'm sure, welcome you warmly. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.